Hello and welcome to History Flights, your monthly-ish tour of contemporary and historical politics with video games. A show made entirely by me, History Flights Productions, which just crossed 200 subscribers and 102,000 lifetime views. I'm so grateful to everyone who supported my quest for truth, justice, and historical accuracy, even as I grieve the death of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting at time of recording, January 5th, 2026. Anyway, today we'll be looking at Venezuela and Guyana on the world map of Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 before flying from the island paradise of St. Bartholomew's, an overseas possession of France, that I guess for Wendy Murdoch and Leonardo DiCaprio meant that their stranding for a few hours on an island paradise was the most important story to come out of the U.S. violation of Venezuelan sovereignty. To the Simon Bolivar International Airport in its capital of Caracas, in an F-35 like the ones that, along with FA-18 Hornets, F-22 Raptors and drones, provided air cover for helicopters illegally extracting a head of state. President Nicolas Maduro was a monstrous dictator of 13 years, but due process must be for everyone, even monsters, or no one, and Trump dangerously eroded it. Sometimes I really hate that my special interest is history. I sometimes feel like Cassandra seeing the fascist pattern unfolding right before our eyes, but unable to do much about it. If you're feeling exhausted by the Venezuela news too, I hope you're empowered by the historical information I give and my passion to fight for what's right, just as I will be by delivering it. If we see the pattern, present the evidence of it, and demand that it stop, this will be the year that Trump starts failing at his project of personalizing American democracy after losing all his 2025 momentum. And what I mean by that is reshaping all institutions from Washington, D.C. to Harvard to Texas and its state maps in his image. Even if he has succeeded in bending many from the Republican Party to most of the administrative agencies. If even one person learns history from me in this age of mass disinformation and AI slop replacing learning, then I'll have done my job. I'll be giving a speech on the Lincoln Memorial Steps called A Year of Dreams and Nightmares at 5051's rally in Washington, D.C. on January 20th for History Flights number 9 and History Flights Tours number 5, National Mall, the Tarnished Heart of America. Then the next episode, diving into presidential power more deeply, History Flights number 10, America's Dangerous President Worship, will be recorded in Bioshock Infinite for President's Day, February 16th, 2026. Likes, subscribes, and bell hits for future episodes will be huge for this channel, as well as comments whether you have compliments or constructive criticism for me. I'm also on Blue Sky, Reddit, and Threads at Official DC Shepherd. SHEPARD. All one word, all lowercase. For the full script with hyperlinked sources, please go to my Substack, which will be linked in the description as well. First off, could 2026 not have been calm for 3 days? At least I got to see my relatives in upstate New York. And before, I was just having fun with my co-host Kevin on my other show, Sunny Redemption Sailing, your bi-weekly voyage for BSV Gaming News, addressing the existential threat of AI surveillance of PlayStation games by Sony, while we discussed our Christmas movies and games. This whole decade just feels like one long, draining year sometimes, and I wish we could reset to before the pandemic and have competent presidents in charge this whole time. The problem is that the Constitution was not designed for an imperial standing army stationed all over the world, that the president could use at will to bomb any country at any moment's notice. That spends 10 times more than all other nations combined, annually, on defense, quote-unquote. But this kind of national standing army is not what the framers wanted. This is why they forced reauthorization of the military every 2 years in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 12 of the Constitution, which states, the Congress shall have power to raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years. Per that same article on constitution.congress.gov, this clause was the basis of the contention by Alexander Hamilton and James Madison in the Federalist Papers that because appropriations for the army must be renewed every 2 years, democratic influence and political processes would prevent Congress from maintaining forces so large that they posed a threat to the American people. They did not take into account that Congress would slowly abdicate its role in declaring war since the attack on Pearl Harbor in World War II. With Vietnam and the Gulf of Tonkin resolution being the point where Congress really went downhill, and the 2002 authorization for the use of military force against the Taliban, but then eventually expanded to Iraq, being an open-ended joke. Meanwhile, despite failing 8 annual audits in a row, the Defense Department, the Department of War, gets waved through every time the annual National Defense Authorization Act is brought up. This is because defense contractors donate financially to congresspeople in exchange for half of all military spending annually. Now the NDAA is so must-pass because defense contractors have factories in practically every state, and job losses there would be politically perilous for congresspeople, that every random congressperson with a crazy idea they want to ram through attaches something as a rider to it. Marjorie Taylor Greene, for instance, slammed it this year as, quote, once again filled with Americans' hard-earned tax dollars used to fund foreign aid and foreign countries' wars, until she cut a backroom deal to screw over what she hates more for some hysterical reason. Trans people like me. Fuck you! You Christo-fascist pick-me-girl! I hope you enjoy cutting and running like the coward you are, because the human blob who has been mean to us for 10 fucking years was mean to you once, Major Traitor Green. Also, Stephen Miller's take on X from November 1st, 2024, this isn't complicated. If you vote for Kamala, Liz Cheney becomes defense secretary, we invade a dozen countries, boys in Michigan are drafted to fight boys in the Middle East. Millions die. How? We invade Russia. Not a chance. We invade nations in Asia. Unspecified. World War III, nuclear winter. Has aged like milk. Shut up and polish a fucking pool cue with that head, you mini-me looking motherfucker. Calming down now. I've been thinking a lot lately about the Roman Empire. Who hasn't for the past couple of years? And how Augustus, the first Roman emperor who reigned from 27 BC to 14 CE, and died from diarrhea that today we take Tums for, what a way to go, established a system of senatorial and imperial provinces. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, senatorial provinces were governed by former consuls and former praetors, both called proconsuls, whose term was annual. Imperial provinces were governed by representatives of the emperor called propraetorian legates, who served indefinitely. As you can see from this map, per Emanuel Wallerstein's, I hope I'm not mispronouncing that, world systems theory, provinces with governors appointed by the Senate tended to be in what's known as the Imperial Core. For the Roman Empire, this was like Italy, Greece, Western Asia Minor, North Africa, since Carthage was so crucial to the supply of grain, oil, and pork for the Roman dole, the free donation of food that people relied on. That caused standards of living in Rome to plummet drastically once the Vandals captured Carthage in 439 CE. Anyway, emperors gave themselves free military reign on the imperial periphery, i.e. frontier provinces such as the Rhine and Danube rivers. So, basically here. And you can tell that a lot of the infrastructure has been very set up along the Rhine River, and it's very bright here, so you can even guess the river without much effort. The other provinces included the Western Mediterranean areas, such as Canaan, and Palestine, as they renamed it, where they installed puppet rulers and had very little administration, but stationed legionaries just in case. Often, Such as in the year of the 4 emperors in 69 CE, parts of the military rebelled and chose their own emperors. Per this map, the Imperial Core for America would definitely be North America, as our only neighbors are Greenland and Canada, and they've been friendly with us for the most part forever. Western Europe through our military alliance with NATO that has been holding despite President Dumbassy Trump's best efforts. Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and South Korea, which to no one's surprise are the UN's most developed countries, or MDCs. The semi-periphery, or buffer zone countries, are regional powers like Russia, China, and India, as well as Mexico, most of South America, where it is currently very dark, metaphorically and literally, and some Middle Eastern countries. The rest of the world, which also highly overlaps with the least developed countries, is the imperial periphery of America. I've been nervous at Trump's expansionist posturing for a while, ever since he blocked the AP from reporting on him for refusing to accept the Gulf of Mexico's transition to the Gulf of America, while blocking us from changing our genders. He also said he wanted to take Greenland for US security, and likely rare earth mineral rights under the melting Arctic, which is not the move when climate change is what it is, and make Canada the 51st state, which I took seriously but not literally. Though what upsets me is that a friend of mine from Canada said the thought made him depressed, and it does so to me too. If you love the Fallout universe as much as I do, spoilers for the TV show ahead. You'll also know that in 2076, the year before Vault-Tec kickstarted the nuclear Great War to guarantee profits from their vault system and ended 11 years of conflict between the United States and China over Anchorage, Alaska, and some of the last remaining oil reserves of the world there and in the Pacific Ocean. As well as civilization as they knew it, the United States invaded and annexed Canada to take some of the last remaining timber in the world after 20 years of resource wars. This was in part spurred by the fact that in the Fallout universe, vacuum tubes were always used for computers, and there was never the microprocessor revolution of the 70s and 80s, so there was not nearly as much energy efficiency as a result. And so they ran out of resources earlier, but, well, the way we're going, anyway, art paralleling life, huh? Still, it's unbelievable that Trump wants to play Emperor of the Americas now. Like, we're all just slaves to Caesar's Legion. Holy shit, though, that reveal in Fallout with Macaulay Culkin, what a performance. If this is his retirement where he comes out occasionally to do things like this, then keep being retired, buddy. It's working for you. And that, we're returning to late 19th century style spheres of influence. Speaking of which, of course the US has misused the Monroe Doctrine, which actually was originally enforced by the British Navy when it was declared in 1823 because it suited their interests. This was the same Britannia that impressed or forced our sailors into service in their navy by claiming they were British deserters, which was an important cause of the War of 1812 with impunity. This rather reminds me of another unstoppable and adventurous military, eh? To turn the Americas into our personal sandbox, it seems. This has always happened, though, such as with the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848, which was catalyzed by defending a border dispute over the Rio Grande, which you can kind of see just from the cities here as well. One of the good and bad things about Microsoft Flight Simulator is that they do not have political borders. But anyway, Texas was annexed in 1845 because it had rebelled in 1836 precisely to keep its slaves, and there was great demand to do so in the South. There were also the private colonizers, such as William Walker in Nicaragua. Then it dramatically increased. In 1900 to 1935, after the Spanish-American War of 1898, quote, liberated Cuba to become a protectorate of us, which is also how we gained control of Guantanamo Bay. Yeah, we've just been sending the Cuban government checks every year for the rent per the treaty, which they ended up putting in drawers for most of Fidel Castro's reign. This was also followed by the illegal seizure of Panama when it declared independence from Colombia in 1901, and then the building of the Panama Canal in 1903 by President Roosevelt, which truly established our naval hegemony in the region because we didn't have to go all the way around South America in order to link up Atlantic and Pacific forces. My grandfather, actually, was steaming through the Panama Canal in 1945 on his way to invade Japan, which would have taken place in November 1946 when the atomic bombs dropped and Japan surrendered. That leaves me with mixed feelings about all of that, because he surely would have died if he had invaded Japan, or well, maybe he would have been okay, but like, a lot of things would have been very different. For sure. Butterfly effect and all that. Well, 100,000 Japanese people died, and it's likely that the war would have ended anyway from sustained American firebombing and the threat of Soviet invasion, but Harry Truman decided to teach the USSR a lesson that we could nuke their cities if we wanted to, and then the Cold War was really on when the Soviets, with the help of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, stole our atomic secrets in 1949. Much of this hegemony of America in the region was established on behalf of private companies such as United Fruit, which was so infamous for instigating coups and the Banana Massacre of 1928 that they literally invented the term Banana Republic. Or perhaps think of Halliburton, Blackwater, and others in Iraq, who gained $138 billion of profit, according to the article that I'll link in the description and also in my Substack post. Of course, there's the coups to stop the evil communism during the Cold War, also known as the domino theory, that if one country fell, then the other one would, and then it would be madness, cats and dogs living together, etc. And then there was the congressionally unauthorized kidnapping of President Manuel Noriega, also on drug charges, which have been trumped up against Maduro, by President George H.W. Bush in Operation Just Cause, a name so iconic it might have inspired the name of the Just Cause games that have you play as Rico Rodriguez, single-handedly overthrowing dictators with wacky physics.
See, it's me, Mario. The militia are here. Take him out. Yeah, I bet you militia.
Though this claim is unsourced. But I thought we'd at least tried to move past this phase during my lifetime. I'm 33. Clearly it was not all that hard to return to the imperial mean for us. As you can see, a group of oil executives will be tapped to run Venezuela as a de facto American colony. So whatever mixed feelings Venezuelans in both America, primarily Florida, and Venezuela itself have right now, either Vice President Delcy Rodriguez stays in power by appeasing the U.S., or they find a different, more right-wing stooge. Maria Corina Machado, leader of the Venezuelan opposition, will definitely not be president, in my opinion. More likely it's because he's still salty she won the Nobel Peace Prize and he had to settle for a fake FIFA Peace Prize. Because Trump said she doesn't have the, quote, respect to govern. DC Shepard from the future here. Sorry to interrupt the video, but I wanted to give you a little bit of a behind the scenes of how HistoryFlights is made. I tend to use a lot of articles in these videos. This can lead to weeks or sometimes months of painstaking research in order to make sure that I have as many perspectives as possible before starting my analysis, so that you get the whole picture. I'm proud to align myself with the sponsor of today's video, Droid, which is an app on iOS and Android that allows you to quickly compare all sorts of different viewpoints on news articles, because we do too little of that these days. I try to take off here, there we go, successfully in a hopefully brighter day for Caracas. I love the church bell sounds, by the way. With Druid, you can have articles read out loud to you and summarized by AI. I will not be doing this myself, but if you need help with that, then I can understand it, kind of. And so, what I can offer you is a discount code of 50% off a year of Druid Premium for both Android and iOS through the code HistoryFlights. That's HistoryFlights, all one word, all caps. That means that you'll pay $2 a month to cut through all the misinformation and noise in the world, get a better, more informed perspective of what's going on in what has already turned out to be a crazy year for 2026. You'll also be supporting the channel, so thank you again to today's sponsor, Droid Premium. Keep in mind also that all of this was likely motivated by Imperial defense as well as expansion. Exxon bought 30% of Guyana's offshore oil fields for $53 billion last year. And the not at all rigged with 95% support referendum in Venezuela in 2023 claiming the western Essequibo region of Guyana, which is about here. So basically almost all the way up to the capital of Georgetown, which would basically threaten all of Guyana's sovereignty, based on a treaty with the British from the literal 1890s, which was also a moment for the up-and-coming young U.S. to exert influence as an arbitrator. This referendum would have also ignored the 1966 Geneva Convention that settled the boundary at where it is today, and that could have threatened Exxon's oil claims. All that sweet, sweet oil money will totally feed us when our natural resources run out due to climate change. Trump did say that he would, quote, come to the rescue of the protesters in Iran if the regime attacked them. So maybe they're next. Or maybe Mexico, because he said something had to be done about Mexico. Or Cuba, based on a vague warning from Marco Rubio. Or Colombia. Or Greenland at last. Since Denmark refuses to sell Greenland and considers it a core part of the Kingdom of Denmark along with Denmark proper and the Faroe Islands, military action against a NATO ally would trigger Article 5 for the first time since NATO did so for the first and hopefully only time in history on our behalf after the attacks on September 11th, which were personal for me because my cousin died in the South Tower. With US forces stationed on bases throughout Europe, that would be devastating for the whole continent. With nuclear war with the United Kingdom and France, a non-zero possibility. We live in the dumbest timeline, and I just want to scream! Ah! Why? This is so stupid! Away from that existential thought for a moment, you'd think I'd feel good about him standing for human rights and deposing a dictator in Iran, and, well, the Ayatollahs have been as brutal as they come, but Trump has not done so in America, and will use this as an excuse to illegally kidnap another national leader without due process and entangle us in another regime change war 4 years and change after we pulled out of the disastrous 20-year-long war in Afghanistan. Just like his hypocrisy for bringing Maduro in on drug charges while pardoning Juan Orlando Hernandez, the president of Honduras from 2014 to 2022. Which is why it's so baffling that an impertinent and obsessive critic of mine from Australia, wahidazal, misrepresented my positions again to somehow paint me as pro-American interventionism in all circumstances. Does this guy have literally anything better to do than criminally doxing me, cyber-stalking me and my family in Eswatini? Here's my name. That's approximately where they live. And he decided that now would be a good time to attack them from a laptop in Australia. He's also constantly taking my positions out of context to say that DC Shepherd with an E, learn to spell your opponent's names. Again, it's Shepard. And my pronouns are they, them, theirs, by the way. He tries to say that I'm a racist and a, quote, dangerous reactionary idiot, when I'm not. He has no evidence other than his own wielding of his Iranian ethnicity as a racial essentialist shield from scrutiny of his mania. I actually have evidence for the things I've accused him of, such as death threats and harassment towards political opponents in the Baha'i faith and elsewhere. I've criticized that organization plenty in another podcast you should watch called The Hidden Faith, which is where the video where I criticize wahidazal is. So check out the full video and my presentation on him linked in the description for more context. The answer to my rhetorical question is probably not. But anyway, first of all, Wahid doesn't understand that I put rescue in scare quotes when I originally made this comment on the subreddit r/Baha'i in a response to a lawyer from the Baha'i faith, supposedly, as the OP does not provide a source, so I cannot verify their claim. Hoping Trump bomb Iran. I'm sorry, my autism went out that time. I had to. On behalf of their cult, Iran does arrest, torture, and sometimes execute Baha'is because it believes that they're heretics for daring to suppose that anything could come after Islam. But its all-male High Council, the Universal House of Justice in Haifa, Israel, uses this for propaganda at the UN by demanding that its members sacrifice themselves by staying in misery or suffering religious punishment if they don't say they're Baha'is at official checkpoints and expose themselves to arrest, because they claim that dissimulation is a graver thing than you're losing your life. I agreed that America should not be intervening militarily for the protesters in Iran, and the scare quotes were to disagree with the very framing Wahid critiques. Second, Wahid overlooks that after the, quote, you'd think I feel good about him standing up for human rights part, which is also inverted framing that Wahid either doesn't understand or misunderstands purposefully, I criticized President Trump for using human rights as a potential excuse to invade Iran. I just did it again now. Just like again, Trump used drug charges as an excuse to invade Venezuela and turned it into an American oil field while pardoning the former president of Honduras for exactly the same thing. Even H.W. Bush had the justification of defending Panamanian opposition candidates who were being attacked with Noriega in 1989. The reason Wahid doesn't analyze this half of my original comment is because it undermines his personal vendetta against me, and he hopes his readers are too stupid to notice. Lastly, Wahid made another rambling Substack post hours after the first one, critiquing a different part of that conversation between myself and another user on X-Baha'i called Joshua Wesley, under the screen name Bahamut19. This facile critique treats our realistic analysis of plausible outcomes in the wake of U.S. intervention, including the reconstruction of an undeniable economic growth in Baghdad, 2 decades on from Saddam's fall, as moral endorsement of the U.S. invasion there. How anyone possessing any level of critical thinking could look at, for instance, my grim description that, quote, the idea is the oil men will run it as techno-feudal lords until they can find a good puppet in Venezuela, as somehow a revealing confession of my desire for oligarchic rule in Venezuela is beyond me. Techno-feudalism is a term used pejoratively by nearly all thinkers who describe it, such as Yanis Varoufakis, and I've criticized it on a live stream in Bioshock 2 as bringing stability and free hands for the few and already powerful at the expense of the data of the many. By saying that we speak from within its presumed aftermath, Wahid fails to consider we are soberly discussing rather than celebrating the mechanics of empire. But wahidazal is so fixated on demonizing us as, quote, white ex-Baha'is who are, quote, dangerous imperialists, when I was never part of the Baha'i faith and have never hurt anyone on purpose in my life, that he has to skew our discussion this way, regardless of whether he comprehends us or not, in order to prioritize a specific narrative of our imagined ideological inheritance over a nuanced reading of our actual intent. In the post, he frequently commits an ad hominem known as the genetic fallacy, where our skin colors and perceived former religious affiliations somehow connect a speculative conversation about Venezuela, describing how power might actually function here, to personal reputational violence. Against him, I think it's unclear. And the ever-present boogeyman of Western imperialism! Okay. The West has done some horrible things, but you cannot just use that as an excuse for everything. Anyway, this allows Wahid to delegitimize me and Joshua Leslie entirely, by claiming our ontology makes genuine dialogue impossible, and making my criticisms of him as dangerous sound weak like Trump did by constantly blasting Democrats. By labeling his targets as dangerous imperialists and entitled first, however, Wahid shut down the very dialogue he claims we are making impossible. Speaking of dialogue, I'd also like to thank Dale Husband, the Honorable Skeptic and moderator of RX Baha'i, for his incredibly based reply. What else can you expect from a pathological liar and abuser? Meaning Wahid, but he also has a very valid characterization of President Trump in that statement. Trump is only liberating Venezuela so he can help American oil companies get that country's oil. True. It was never about human rights. The next leader of Venezuela may turn out to be another tyrant. That's what happened to Chile after 1973. This is my interjection here. Meaning, the overthrow of President Salvador Allende by the military of Chile in a CIA-backed coup, instituting 17 years of dictatorship by Augusto Pinochet, who I should note was arrested in 1998 while traveling to the UK for back surgery. Which seems like a much better way to go about this whole arresting of heads of state who kill and disappear with thousands of people thing, if you're gonna do it, than killing 80 people in Caracas in the middle of the night. Capitalism, Dale continues, operates best under fascism. Couldn't have put it better myself. But I did kind of elaborate by replying with a version of the following that I have since edited for broadcast. I expect Wahid to not let me go for a while because his towering ego can never let him be wrong on anything. In my past video on him, he falsely claimed defamation on to regionally block it in Australia, rattled him. The podcast I filmed with religion and cannabis researcher Chris Bennett and Dale Husband on January 10th will be the Hidden Faith video I ever have with Wahid as a focus. But if he wants to nib at my heels and not stop stalking me like he said he would after his post illegally doxing me, while metaphorically flushing me down the toilet, and his other post attacking me for, quote, taking parentage using a made-up trans friend, family is off limits, asshat! I'll show that on small mentions in my History Flights or Sunny Redemption Sailing podcast, depending on the context, because like I say, turn your trolls into free content. Emphasis on small. Anyway, capitalism works equally well under constitutional monarchy in the UK or Japan, as well as a kleptocracy like Russia, social communism, although it's a mixed economy, like China, and Sharia law, like in Saudi Arabia. Capitalism has won, not because it's actually the best system, but because most companies work with whatever country doesn't fuck with their profit motive. What appears to be happening is that, since Yarvin-style techno-feudalism is failing at home due to mass protests, boycotts, elections, vigilant state governors in blue states in particular, and attorneys general filing mountains of lawsuits, as well as digital scrutiny of the administration's failings on everything from the economy to Epstein to AI facial recognition-powered immigration arrests, Trump is, in fact, using the awesome power of the U.S. military to export fascism abroad instead, by installing that group of oil executives I mentioned earlier as the technocratic feudal lords helping him run Venezuela. With that, I'm going to start the flight. That was a nighttime raid, so I'm not going to change the time of day after all. Well, my parking brake was engaged. That would be bad if somebody died because they forgot to disengage the parking brake. Whoa! Ooh, right in the lightning. 'Cause I'm on a highway to the danger zone.
Approach, Tree Delta Charlie Charlie Lima is type. 1 miles east of Tango Foxtrot Foxtrot Juliet.
Okay, well, at least I have the digital guides to help me.
Tree Delta Charlie Charlie Lima. Approach. Squawk 1114.
Oh God, I would be a horrible fighter jet pilot. This thing just loves to go wild. But at least I'm using the compass to navigate. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Okay. Ah! No! I hit the water! Ah! Oh gosh! Oh! They make this look so easy in the movies! Ah! Oh, no, 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 no. I'm upside down now. Great. Okay. Oh boy.
Charlie Charlie Lima. ATC services terminated. Good day.
Oh, terminated. Well, okay. Time to try to fly while I, try to present the rest of the script. Oh god. Okay, yeah, this should make it a little easier to see me. There we are. Here's the wheels. There they go. Okay. So, I'm gonna be following this blue light for a while. In total darkness. As people peacefully sleep in Caracas. And then bomb the city out of nowhere to facilitate the capture of Nicolas Maduro. I think that President Trump is trying to entangle us in as many wars as possible to distract from his senility and failing health, potentially get us into a state of permanent war to grift our resources on purpose, 1984 style, then use wartime powers to restrict free speech, like Woodrow Wilson did in World War I, such as by shutting down the internet entirely, per the Communications Act of 1934. This gives the president the power to shut down wireless communications in an emergency he could cook up right before the midterms. Maybe even use that same excuse to shoot peaceful anti-war protesters Kent State style, like he's always wanted. Though the magnitude of malfeasance is of course lower than President Trump, it's like how Wahid always wants to misrepresent me, and tries to harass and intimidate me to distract from my fearless reporting on his 3 decades of despicable behavior. Finally, Trump is once again performing what I will coin as Trumpeter's distraction. Do a terrible thing, then distract from that terrible thing with another thing that's also terrible in and of itself, to keep your opponents guessing about your motive for doing so. Repeat ad nauseum until your opponents are exhausted and surrender, because the system is based on slow and careful assessment of facts while crime, whether online from a single house in Australia, as the biggest lolcow I've ever interacted with, or the desk of the White House is based on chaos at speed. What Trump is doing is a crime under an international law. But I don't think all-American intervention is always imperialist. The key is that when we work multilaterally and within UN authorization, it has led to good outcomes. For instance, you can argue that America should not have given Iraq so many weapons in the first place to fight Iran in the grinding Iran-Iraq War of 1980 to 1988, while at the same time sending money to the Contras of Nicaragua from arms purchases by Iran in the Iran-Contra affair that only didn't bring down the Reagan administration because the president slept through and exhibited dementia for all of his second term. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Also, the WMDs we did find were left over from said war, dwindled by Saddam exhausting them against Kurds in the Iraqi uprising of 1991. However, I don't think that, for instance, allying with a bunch of countries based on a legal UN Security Council resolution to undo Saddam's invasion of Kuwait in 1990 to 1991 was itself imperialist, just because Wahid baldly asserts that any Western interventionism is paternalistic. We tried a multilateral coalition again successfully for the war in Afghanistan, though we should have just accepted the Taliban's surrender in December 2001. Then we tried to pull a third bunch of rabbits out of our hat for Coalition of the Willing in the 2003 invasion of Iraq. But despite Bush's infamous rejoinder, "You forgot Poland" at the 2004 debate, said coalition was not nearly as extensive as that of the Gulf War. Wahid also cites the example of NATO and Arab intervention in the Libyan civil war in 2011. which I'll analyze in more detail in a future episode talking about African dictators more generally. But like many other fanboys, he plans the agency of Libyan rebels, who were given air support by NATO after UN Security Council Resolution 1973 authorized that, and the rebels killed Gaddafi with their bare hands in horrific fashion as a result of an organic rebellion. He was not some benevolent ruler, despite what he may have accomplished, but a brutal dictator who murdered people in the Lockerbie bombing terrorist attacks of 1988 and committed multiple human rights violations as means justified by the ends of Jamahiriya. Again, I'm sorry if I'm butchering that. A third way between capitalism and socialism. Wahid has to blame everything he doesn't like on white Westerners, though, so his heroes cannot possibly have any flaws. I'm noticing an increasing number of Africans viewing Gaddafi's reign with similar rose-tinted glasses. But again, I'll talk about that in a future video, so please like, subscribe, and hit the bell if you're enjoying this. Then lastly, there's the multinational coalition of 90-plus nations formed after ISIS rose to power in 2014 that stomps the Islamic State as a contiguous geopolitical entity into the multiple tiny cells we're still fighting, such as with Trump's illegal strike on Nigeria. However, that's not getting nearly as much media attention as Venezuela because abuses against Africa never do. Remember, Trump also ditched Syrian Kurdish forces when they had done most of the ground fighting, and that was also memory hold. The key, again, is to not do anything unilaterally like we're doing right now. Man, this thing gets away from you if you look away for even 1 second. Gosh. Oh. Again, I don't know how people do this at this speed. For real. With, like, the risk of death. But in any event, speaking of the military, this is the problem with the state power relying on the monopoly on the use of force. If military commanders don't disobey even illegal orders, and they definitely haven't here, then there's little Congress can do unless they're willing to impeach and convict Trump, which is a purposefully high bar to minimize political persecution. This is why we bury him in the midterms. It might be our last chance for democracy. However, my fear is if likely blue wave results in massive Democratic control of the House and a squeaker for Democrats in the Senate that still causes many centrist Republicans to waver towards impeachment, to finally get rid of this guy before he destroys the party, then there's a non-zero possibility that he might invoke the Insurrection Act to try to get around the Posse Comitatus Act, which prevents the military from being used for domestic law enforcement. This would allow him to bring the military home in what's known as the Imperial Boomerang to try to steal the midterms before that happens. Or to try to murder Congress again! Remember January 6th. The government is quietly erasing it. Before it's sworn in on January 2027, if he feels like his back is up against the wall because of the dictator's doom loop. In other words, while this nightmare scenario of a final military gamble for absolute power is unlikely, invading Venezuela was also unlikely until it happened. Now that it has, it was probably a practice run for what could come next in his muscular assertion of unilateral executive authority, whether it's foreign or domestic enemies that he attacks. It could also be that Trump is imprisoning Maduro in New York City, which drew protests within hours, and which Mayor Mamdani strongly condemned, to purposefully cause civil unrest or draw a terrorist attack by Venezuelan guerrillas to New York that weakens his political opponents, giving him all the justification he needs for whatever comes next. Basically, only China or Russia has the power to stop us at this point. A direct war, not so much. That would end in nuclear winter. They'll instead create a proxy war by funding terrorism against American civilians and rebellions against U.S. forces. Rather like how we funded the Taliban against the Soviet Union from 1979 to 1989 in Operation Cyclone, which according to Guinness Book of World Records was the most expensive covert operation of all time. to disrupt their disastrous imperial adventure in Afghanistan, or Pakistan did for the Taliban to mess with our own Afghanistan quagmire, which they've come to regret, as ISIS-K and the Taliban launch attacks. With Russia weakened by its own genocidal war in Ukraine, even as it condemns our attacks on Venezuela, of the two, China will probably be the one to back guerrilla militias, narco-terrorist groups such as FARC, and remnants of the Venezuelan military who have been trained to do guerrilla war, to drain our resources and attention until China has the strength to finally make a move on Taiwan. Whatever happens, Putin and Xi have just been given permission to carve out their spheres of influence without any pretense of American moral leadership because it's been diminished for good. This means that, even if a Democratic president, or hopefully presidents, plural, manages to somewhat repair diplomatic ties, after squandering our sole superpower status for 20 years of gain for oil companies, the world has already entered a multipolar warlordism, rather than the failing and problematic but much more stable legacy of the 1945 to 1971 Bretton Woods Consensus that brought the world out of World War II. International law in general was usually enforced by American soft power, starting with their intervention alongside the Soviets to stop Britain, France, and Israel's invasion of Egypt in the Suez Crisis of 1956, which really began the irreversible decline of European colonial empires, exhausted by World War II, and the bipolar world of the Cold War. And UN peacekeepers, as well, have been helpful, though they have their problems too, such as sexual assault. This was based on at least a pretense of restraint, to use military might only when necessary, though it was often wielded unnecessarily in, say, Vietnam, Iran, and South America. Good examples from later in the American century include the Bosnian War and Kosovo War. American naval might also patrolled the world's oceans and secured global trade, which brought globalism for all its benefits and flaws to the fore. I hate American imperialism for sure, but the problem has always been what to replace it with in international affairs. Ever since I was 12, I've wanted it to slowly transition into a just and democratic federal world government, with America first among equals. I eventually developed that into a story called Confederation Awakening for the Confederation of Earth, with dragons, dinosaurs, magic, and the wildest solar civil war you've ever read about taking place in the 22nd century. The alternative, with America, Russia, and China running amok and shredding what remains of international law, is not any better. In the meantime, this is why Democrats need to push for oversight on Venezuela where they can while out of power. Push for impeachment even though it's unlikely. Because remember, anything is unlikely until it happens. And also keep hammering in on affordability and not get distracted. The number one issue in America is always the economy, stupid. And that is not an issue that will go away by the time the midterms happen. Whereas this operation might if it doesn't escalate. And even the Epstein files, though unlikely to do so, might as well. Presidents have limited ability to influence the economy unless they mess with the Federal Reserve, which would be an unprecedented disaster. And I use that with the spelling of unprecedented that Trump used on purpose. To begin with, without working with Congress. And President Trump has no inclination to do so. Either way, President Trump has no plan to fix inflation, stop disrupting supply chains, thereby increasing food prices with immigration crackdowns, stop terrorizing federal employees whose layoffs make an already tight job market that much harder, stop restricting grants that represent billions in investments in healthcare and education, though they are, quote, reviewing grants frozen for DEI through the normal NIH review processes, or roll back the illegal and unilateral taxes on consumers known as tariffs, unless ordered by federal judges. And maybe not even then. The Trump administration has obeyed about 2/3 of court orders. That's still mostly okay, but it's concerning that he disobeyed any at all. And most of that has been foot dragging on things like sending Venezuelans to El Salvador to be tortured without any due process based on an ancient reading of the Alien Enemies Act. That was passed as part of the Alien and Sedition Act by John Adams. I'll get into that in more detail in America's Dangerous President Worship. He will also not deal with natural disasters because he denies climate change and likes to use disaster aid as political leverage until he was again blocked for doing so recently by a federal judge. And most damning of all, Trump will never unfreeze the child care grants he illegally impounded for all 50 states because of an overblown scandal in Minnesota being used as a culture war prop to justify racism and immigration roundups against Somalis and take out Governor Walz politically. Give fascists an inch and they'll take a mile. Finally, Trump does not have any inclination to stop acting like Donny and Antrumpnette with his massive vanity projects, such as the Arc de Trump, the copycat of the Arc de Triomphe he got jealous of during a military parade in France early on in his first administration, that will begin construction in 2 months. Nor will he stop the $400 million golden tumor on the White House, Ballroom, that they hope to get approved by March, a double the original estimated price. None of it was appropriated by Congress, either. And the renaming of the John F. Kennedy Center was also illegal, yet he took a giant orange dump on it anyway. I can't wait to film him and criticize that for my HistoryFlights tours of the National Mall. So please, again, like, subscribe, and hit the bell for that. The only thing that might give him somewhat of a political safety valve is if the Supreme Court strikes down the tariffs, which it seems likely to in my analysis. However, all the refunds will go to corporations who will not cut their margins for us out of the goodness of their hearts. And if the AI bubble based on delusional golden calf, machine god pipe dreams that has been single-handedly driving the growth of the economy on paper pops next year, or perhaps this year, who knows? It will likely lead to a Great Recession-style government bailout of already rich people, which will exacerbate people's sour view of Trump's economic policy. No amount of distraction will stop Democratic momentum here. Only the Democrats can do that by shooting themselves in the foot like they always do. I really, really hope they don't, though, because I do not want them to be a controlled opposition for 20 years or whatever and have fascism run amok. Though some of them already are like that. Cough, Chuck Schumer, cough. If he tries to use military force in the United States, we should all join together and make sure that this will be his last mistake. Thank you for watching. And try to rest easier tonight having learned some history.